Well, hey guys, and welcome back to HBF. I hope that you guys have had a great day and that you guys are looking forward to diving in to this study for tonight. And so, if you guys have not go ahead and open up to Hebrews chapter 10, verses 1 through 18. We'll read that passage together. Uh, if there's any questions or anything that stands out, go ahead and talk about and just discuss that, and then we'll move on with our study. All right, guys. So our first section that we covered this past Sunday was verses 1 through 4, and we broke that down looking at the law. And we asked these questions of, well, what exactly is the law, and why does it matter to non-Jewish people? And so we established that the law is the first five books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. And so this is where we get the law of God, or what is called the Mosaic Law. And so as we dived into that, and we understand that yes, the Jewish people were given the law, that we as created beings, as people who are made in the image of God, have this moral law of God written on our hearts. And so we don't necessarily have the civil law or the ceremonial law that was given to the Jews, but we all, everyone that is created in the image of God, has the moral law of God written on their heart. And so that is how we know what sin is. And so when we look at the books of the law in the Old Testament, our first question that I want you guys to discuss tonight is, what exactly comes to mind that as you're reading through these books, what exactly comes to mind when you're reading them? And the second question that I have you guys, or want you guys to talk about, is in all of that there's five books of these laws, and we talked about how this law points us to Jesus. How? Talk about how the law actually points us, people who are not given a physical copy of the law, but have the moral law of God written on our hearts. How does this law point us closer to Jesus? So our second point on Sunday was about Christ's obedience, and I've got a quote that I want to read again from Charles Spurgeon. It says, "The law never came to save men. It never was its intention at all. It came on purpose to make the evidence complete that salvation by works is impossible, and thus to drive the elect of God to rely wholly on the finished salvation of the gospel." So when we look at Christ's obedience in relation to the law, in light of this quote from Spurgeon, Spurgeon is making a direct point that Christ fulfills the law, and because he fulfills the law, he can be our perfect sacrifice, which is the gospel. That because of Christ's obedience, Christ is able to go and stand as our sacrifice before God, because he is the one who has fulfilled the law. And so, if you will, take some time to read Hebrews 10, verses 5 through 7. And I want to point out a couple questions for you guys. Verse 5 says, "Consequently, when Christ came into the world, he said, 'Sacrifices and offerings you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me.'" What is the significance of that? Why does Christ feel the need to point that out? And then secondly, when it talks about sacrifices and offerings, and those not being things that God desires, what are some ways that we create sacrifices and offerings to God even though they're not needed today? Now, in our last point from Sunday, we talked about our own sanctification process, and again, sanctification is just this lifelong journey of being made holy and being made more like God. And so, to be sanctified, we talked about how it is to separate from profane things, or bad things or sinful things, and dedicate to God. So it's to separate, to be made holy, or to purify internally by the renewing of the soul. And so this is our sanctification process. And so as we look at this, what does this passage teach us about the link between obedience and holiness? And then what are some ways that you yourself and within your group, uh, how do you try to be sanctified? What are ways that you can grow in your sanctification process? Discuss this with your group, and then we'll come back. I want to thank you again for tonight. And I realized this past Sunday, I made a comment about how you're not good enough. And I realized that for a lot of us, that can probably be really triggering. But I want to encourage you, and I want to lift you up in this. This passage teaches us that it is Christ and Christ alone who stands and fulfills the law. And yes, we're not good enough to fill the law on our own, but we are made in the image of God, and God tells us time and time again that He loves us, He cares for us, and that He is the one that stands in the gap for us. Guys, I love you. I look forward to seeing you guys again, and you guys have a great rest of the week.